My name is Patrick Meeks. I'm with Williams, and I'm going to buzz through the agenda that we're going to talk about today, just some few talking points. And wanted to talk a little bit about Williams before we get started. So Williams is an energy infrastructure company, and we have our primary assets are gathering fields. Talk a little bit louder? Okay. So our primary assets are gathering fields for natural gas liquids, and processing the liquids, and then transporting natural gas to markets primarily in the southeast, northeast, and then the Pacific Midwest. The Pacific Northwest. And the application that my team supports, the pipeline that my team supports, is Northwest Pipeline, where we have a 3,900 mile pipeline that transports up into the Pacific Northwest. Our application is a web-based front end with a Java middle tier SQL Server back end, and we support customers, mostly utility companies, LDCs, or local distribution companies, for market up into the Seattle area. And our application allows our customers to contract for capacity on our pipeline to move it from point A to point B on the pipeline. They allow for daily requests of gas to flow to the various markets, and then monthly billing and invoicing, and it's our revenue generation for the Northwest Pipeline. And a little bit of background. So before I got into the Journey of DevOps, we were very much an old school development shop. We're a small team, 15 tops, range between 10 and 15 developers, architect, DBAs and such, and we tested manually. Everything was done manually. Developers would do the testing, turn it over to the business users to do the testing. The only automation we had at all was a CI tool. We'd use TeamCity to build the application, to put it into a development environment, and then the manual testing took over. And then the impetus that got us going down this path of DevOps is, in 2015, we had a string of 3 compliance violations. Since we're an interstate gas pipeline, we're regulated by the FERC, and we had some data exposures on the application, through our application, that provided us a potential market impact. So we self-reported our findings to the FERC, and in doing so, we laid out a strategy where we would find a better way to test. And at that time, I wasn't necessarily thinking automation. I was just thinking I need to find a better way to test. So I went in search of testing tools and came across CA Technologies. More accurately, they found me, because I didn't know CA at the time. So they called me. We talked through some strategies about Agile Requirements Designer for testing, for setting up your test cases, API testing with app tests. We talked service virtualization. We talked test data management. A lot of buzzwords. So we decided on a set of tools, ARD, TDM, app test. Brought CA in to do a proof of concept, and we picked one of the business processes that caused us our compliance violation, and started modeling that business process with ARD. And within the first day, working with our business and IT experts, we found that the process even had further defects than we already knew about. So that tool paid off right away. We found that defect, we fixed it, put it back into production. And so we knew that the POC was good. It did exactly what we were expecting it to do, so we purchased that set of tools along with service virtualization. So we buy the tools, we get them installed, and now what? It's like, I have a small team of developers, 10, 11, 12. We're busy. I mean, my team's overloaded with bug fixes, major projects, minor enhancements, and we just didn't have time to become agile and do things faster. So I connected with an outsource group that Williams uses, Wipro, and they have a team of test engineers, and they offered their services, and we pulled together a team of on-site and offshore test engineers to help us down this journey. And so we assembled the team, we sent everybody to training, my team, the Wipro engineers, and everybody's learned the products that they're responsible for, and so we mimicked what we learned from CA. We turned everybody loose with ARD, and instead of asking our business folks to redesign what the application is supposed to do, we elected to reverse engineer the programs that we currently had running. So test engineers are out, or business analysts are doing the reverse engineering of stored procedures in Java and ARD, and just going off like crazy. Then we had another group of people who were building data marts to support the data that the ARD is generating. And then we asked one group to take one business process and let's build API test and let's test out the entire business process. So we went down that route. And we would set up, the first meeting of a week, we would set up requirements. This is what we want the test to do. The engineer would go back and build the tests into the API test, and then bring it back to us later that week, and we would review the progress that they had made. Well, this was a very common theme. I like what you did, but we need to be testing something else. Next guy on my team says, yep, you're right, but we should also be testing this. Other guy says, yep, we also need to be testing this. So we come away from this with 3 additional requirements that we send the engineers back to build, add more test data, and this cycle repeats. This cycle went on for several months. And we were having a sense of accomplishment. I mean, we really thought that we were getting things done. People were busy. People were doing ARDs and TDMs, and we were adding test after test into this business process. But my IT leaders and my business leaders came to me and said, this is great work. We think that we like what you're doing. Show me. What do you have to show me? I said, sorry, I really can't because it's not done yet. So I have nothing to show you. Give me more time. Okay, go back, do more time. So switching gears just a little bit, this resonated in my brain, and I probably didn't realize to the extent that it resonated. I'm a hobbyist in woodworking. I do remodels at home, and I build bookcases for my wife, and one weekend I'm at the sanding stage of a bookcase, and I'm sanding away, my brain is clear, and all of a sudden it hit me. We're trying to use agile tools in a waterfall approach. I'm afraid to show anybody anything until I'm done with everything. So I knew we had to change our approach. So on Monday, I came into the office and I assembled the testers, the developers, even some business folks, and I asked one question: why did we buy these tools? Somebody said, well, we want to automate our tests. Nope. Somebody said, well, we want to do better testing. Well, yeah, we want to do better testing. Somebody in the back of the room said, compliance. I said, right. We had a compliance violation. So why are we trying to test 100% of a business process when all we right now need to test is make sure that this application has no compliance risk at all? So I asked the team to figure out a new process. How are we going to do this? I want all external facing screens to have identified what is my compliance risk, and let's put a test around only satisfying my compliance risk. We want to define who owns the steps. Is it going to be a test engineer? Is it going to be a business analyst, an IT analyst? Is it going to be the business? Who owns each of the steps? And so we came up with a process where we would take one of the test engineers and work with a developer and work with a business user, and we would do screen recordings using app tests, and we would record the functionality of a screen, capture all the metrics, filter out all the noise, and it shows me exactly what methods we just called. It shows me what arguments we passed in to retrieve the data. So then once we know that, then we can go back into TDM and we can create data marts that will satisfy those API requests. So knowing that we have a number of companies in our pipeline and they all have rights to see certain data, we decided to take one user from every company and run it through the test. So that we are truly testing for every company in our pipeline. And using those two tools, App Test and TDM, we put ARD aside for right now because it's not satisfying my immediate need. We'll get to ARD later. Now, all of this was happening at the latter part of January of this year. And I wanted to set a goal for the team. I said, we have 8 weeks left in the quarter. We have 67 identified external facing screens. I want these tested by the end of the quarter. And their eyes. It's like, how can we possibly get 67 screens done in 8 weeks when we couldn't do one business process in 3 months? Trust me, this new process, we've streamlined it. Let's go for it. The results were, they finished a week ahead of schedule. We hit every screen, every compliance risk, and they finished it in 7 weeks and not 8 weeks. We found 4 additional screens with minor infractions. We found a couple screens that had some process inconsistencies that we couldn't really understand why it was doing what it was doing. And we found some filtering issues. Got them all fixed, got those put back into production, and all in all, not bad. I thought the team did a great job. In fact, we went to the driving range and hit golf balls just as a celebration for the great work everybody did. So to put this into perspective here a little bit, what we have today, and this is the most recent data that I have, which is probably 2 weeks old, is we've identified 186 methods that we've currently put tests against in 68 services, and the team is tracking about 20 to 25 of these methods per week. Now, to compare that with what's my target end state, we have almost 2,800 methods that make up our application, and I'm targeting 80% of those methods, assuming that 20% is going to be reports and drop downs and other random object clicks that we don't really need to test that method. Now, it was about a year ago here at CA World where I was looking at release automation, and I intentionally did not choose release automation on the first purchase that I made because it didn't make sense to me. Why would I automate crap going into production faster? Now, what I learned this last year was I should have started with release automation, and there's some very, very good reasons why I should have started there. One is it's a lower entry cost. It doesn't cost me near as much money to set up automated releases as it does to have a year or two worth of API test generation. Number two, faster results. The day that I put release automation in production was June 15th of this year. And at 9 a.m. on June 15th, we deployed our application for the first time ever while customers were in the application running. Seamless. So we got our immediate benefits. Now another reason why I would look at release automation first is just look at the nature of the work. If we look at the development life cycle as let's say an assembly line where work flows from left to right. If I do not automate my releases, any improvements that I make in my testing to speed that process up is held up by my arbitrary quarterly planned release. I'm not going to realize any of those benefits until my next planned release. So let's automate that. Let's automate the release and then start looking at the unit testing level and automate the unit tests so that developers get a faster feedback that they know that their code worked or it did not. That unit test gets promoted up into an integration test where we test that unit against the entire services for that business process. Then we automate that gets migrated up into a regression test where we test the entire application. Now, when this code is ready to go into production, I can release it just like that. Anytime my customers want, I can release. The process starts over. Now I'm deploying more frequently, but small chunks of code. And it's easier to detect when things do go wrong because I don't have 50 things that just went into production. I have 1 or 2 things that just went into production. Easier to trace it back, easier to fix, and I've got the mechanism in place to quickly respond to it and get that pushed back into production. So I had to sell this to my bosses. And during the early stages of looking at automation, I came across a study by Gartner. And this study was done a few years ago, but it still holds very true today. And their premise is that developers or development teams that want to get their product to market faster with better quality must shift their testing to earlier in the software development lifecycle. They need to be using isolation testing and minimizing the use of UI testing, and learn to use mock or service virtualization technologies. So what does that mean? A lot of words. So Gartner actually describes their testing, layered testing, in a pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid represents where the bulk of the testing occurs, your unit tests. As your unit tests get promoted up into your functional test, this is your service layer. You're testing at the API layer, your business logic. Now, you don't want to forget about your UI testing, but what you want to do is test only what you need through the UI. You don't need to test your business logic through the user interface, but you need to test that your calendar object works, your drop-downs work. You can type in the edit fields. The visual components are working the way they're supposed to work. Gartner talks about how UI testing is brittle and difficult to maintain. Oftentimes the testing tool may break when seemingly there's nothing has been changed. And by the way, this was a 45-minute presentation to my IT staff. I'm trying to boil this down to really 2 main slides and a very quick topic. So when we talk about virtualizing services, if we're trying to track down where a problem exists in the IT chain, I want to be able to isolate certain things away from where the problem is expected to be. So I can actually virtualize out the database layer from my user objects, and I can run a very targeted test against that object, and I can provide that virtualized service the response that I want it to get so that I can test negative and positive testing. So the conclusion for Gartner is that teams will increase their ability to get quality products to market faster by focusing on scripts that can be reused for unit, integration, and performance testing. And a layered testing strategy helps teams exploit exploit script reuse and reduce the need for expensive UI testing. So the first time I tried to have that conversation with my business leaders, we both walked away from that meeting very frustrated. I could not boil that information down to a non-technical term. The second time I had that conversation was with the vice president of our pipeline. His name's Ed. So Ed asked me one day, he says, "Pat, is this testing tool really going to work for us? We're spending a lot of money. How is it going to work for us?" I said, "Ed, let me talk to you about a concept that I learned while in this journey." And I read the book, The Phoenix Project. I'm seeing a lot of heads nod. You probably read it. And so I took the concept of the 4 types of work and I explained it to him. And I said, "Ed, what is it that you want me to do? What do you want from my team?" "Well," he said, I want the application to be up and running all the time." I said, "Yep, operationally, you want the application running. I have a team of programmers. What do you want my programmers to do?" "Well, I want features written into our application that work and they don't break." I said, "Great. Let's call that business work." Now, Ed, sometimes you're going to give me a request that I have to go off and I have to do something else that's like build a database or a network, install a network, communications. That's not business work, but it enables your business work. So I'm going to call that IT work. Right about now, I noticed Ed's writing down these 4 types of work. And I said, there's another thing that we do after we get a change ready to go into production. We have work that we have to do, and we call that operational change. He nods, okay. I said, now Ed, there's one important piece here. There's one more type of work that kills all of our other productivity. And I said, that's unplanned work. And Ed looked straight at me and he says, that's your production support, isn't it? And I said, yep, that is. So one thing I did, Ed, is I went back in the previous work timesheets and I looked at everybody's work orders that they're charging time to, and I categorized them to these 4 types of work. I said, Ed, my team is spending 34% of their time doing your business work and 45% of their time fixing bugs. And he goes, geez, that seems backwards. I said, yeah, very much. So my question is, how do I shift percentage of time away from unplanned work over to business work? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, do it right the first time. I said, absolutely. How do I do that? I don't know. I said, well, I do. I said, and I explained the unit testing, how we build the unit test, promotes up into the integration, into the regression. And I said, once we build a unit test, your team, your business folks should never have to test that again until we change the process, and we'll test it every time we deploy code. So I walked away from that meeting. I got up and he stuck out his hand and he shook my hand and he looked me straight in the eye and he goes, Pat, he said, that was a very insightful conversation. I really appreciate it. He got it. He understood that concept. So fast forward to June 30th of this year, I had just wrapped up the first half of the second quarter, run all my metrics, pulled all my numbers together, and I'm leaving for the day and I see Ed in the elevator lobby. And I said, Ed, you remember the 4 types of work conversation we had? He goes, yeah, I do. I said, well, just to refresh your memory, 34% business work, 45% unplanned work. I said, and I told him I just wrapped up all my second quarter numbers. I said, you'll be happy to know that my team is spending 52% of their time on business work and 35% on unplanned work. And he said, that's fantastic. He said, that's great. He said, your team is the only team in our company that's doing this, isn't it? I said, yeah. He said, you need to get that bumped up to the enterprise. I said, Ed, I'm working on it. So I feel like the selling point to the business went extremely well. So we've seen the shift in work from unplanned to business work. So I went back and I looked at our defects over the last 3 years, and our application recorded about 270 defects in 2015 before we had any automation, before we had any change in process. And then in 2016, we started changing our process and we were starting to get our automation in place, and we did it. It's starting to pay off. So we're down under 200, and this year we're still building out the breadth of our testing. Our processes are better and our defects have come down to about 120. Now on the compliance side, we see very similar results. 35 down to 22, down to 11. And we know that all of our compliance defects that get reported now get bundled with a unit test, and so we're making sure that we're not going to be re-exposing ourselves to that same risk. So on the flip side, our enhancements have been able to go up. We've seen a steady increase over the last 3 years of what we've been able to put in for enhancements for our business folks. Now, for release automation, we put our release automation in service on June 15th, as I said, and what this is doing is it's tracking the deployment number. So you can see before June, or before the 6th deployment, we were averaging somewhere between 55 minutes and an hour and a half for somebody on my team to get code deployed into production. We put release automation in, and that first time was about 2 minutes. And it was done during the day, 9 o'clock in the morning. Now we had a little bit of hiccup here on our next release because we had something configured incorrectly, and and that particular deployment didn't work so well. We had to step in and manually intervene. We fixed it, and then you can see that our deployment numbers come way back down. And now we're tracking somewhere under a minute for most of our deployments. Sometimes it takes a minute and a half, but rarely does it take, I don't think it's even taken 2 minutes since about the 11th deploy. So great success there. And here's just another look at the number of deployments we've done month over month. As you can see, up until June, those were all manual deployments. A lot of time was spent by my team deploying code. Since we've put release automation in service, we've done over 30 deployments, and none of them have failed. We've had good success with all of them. And the best part is when we do a deployment, it opens up a change request through our ticketing system. It waits for the approvals from the appropriate people. Once the approvals are done, it kicks into gear and it deploys the code, or deploys the application. Then it goes back and it closes the ticket. So it enforces our ITIL processes as well as speeds up our deployment time. So our current state of automation. All right, guys, this is supposed to be hidden. There we go. I had some slides that were supposed to be hidden. So anyway, looking at the value of what we're getting out of our automation so far is we have better definition of our business rules inside the testing tools. We are producing fewer defects that discovered in production. We're catching more things in development. We do have a lower compliance risk, and the compliance risk can be very, very costly to a company. I mean, we're in the millions of dollars. This is not chump change. We have the deployment agility. We have the ability to deploy anytime our customers ask us to deploy. And all of this is leading to greater customer satisfactions. Those who transport gas on our pipeline rate us as well as all other customers in industry surveys, and we see numbers coming up.